My daughter called me at 6:47 on a Tuesday morning, not a text. A call. She never calls before 9. I was in the garage, coffee going cold on the workbench, halfway through rewiring an old table lamp I'd pulled from the curb the week before. I'd been retired for 3 years, and somehow always had more projects than hours. That was fine by me. When I saw her name on the screen, I felt the small automatic worry any parent feels. She's 38, married, healthy, but still, you never fully stop. Dad. Her voice was off, tight in a way I hadn't heard since her mother's funeral. Don't say anything yet. Just listen. I set the lamp down. I need you to not go into the house today. Don't go through the front door. Don't let Evan know you're home, and don't answer if he calls. Can you do that? Evan, my son-in-law, my daughter's husband of 11 years, the man who'd been living in my basement apartment for the past 8 months while they got back on their feet. Laura, I said, what's going on? Dad, please, just trust me. I'm driving up from Kingston right now. I'll be there in 2 hours. Don't. Go. Inside. She hung up. I stood in the garage holding my phone, listening to the neighborhood wake up around me. A dog somewhere down the street, a school bus doing its early run, the particular morning quiet of a Barry subdivision in October. My breath made small clouds in the cold air. I didn't go inside. I should back up. Tell you how we got here, because it didn't start with that phone call. It started the way most disasters start, slowly, with good intentions. My wife passed 4 years ago. Lung cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the end. After 34 years together, the house felt like a museum. Every room had her in it. I'm not complaining. That's not what this is. I'm just telling you what was true. I was 63 years old, retired from a career in municipal water management, healthy, reasonably sharp, and profoundly alone. Laura is our only child. She and Evan had been renting in Kingston since they got married. Good jobs, decent life, no kids yet. When Sandra passed, Laura drove up every other weekend for months. She was worried about me, I know that. I think she still carried guilt about living 3 hours away. About a year after the funeral, she called and asked if they could move in for a bit. Evan's company had downsized. She was between contracts. They needed to save money, maybe a year, get back on stable ground. I had the basement, apartment, full bathroom, separate entrance, its own little kitchen. Sandra and I had rented it out occasionally over the years. I said yes without hesitating. She was my daughter, of course. They moved in on a Saturday in February, with a rented cube van and more boxes than I expected. I helped carry things down the stairs. Evan shook my hand and said he really appreciated it. Laura made dinner that first night, and we ate together at the kitchen table the way we used to when she was young. It felt good. It felt like the house was alive again. The first few months were fine. Better than fine, honestly. Laura would come up for coffee on Sunday mornings. Evan fixed the fence along the back property line without being asked. I had company. I had reason to keep the place tidy. I wasn't rattling around by myself anymore. The changes were so gradual I didn't see them coming. In April, Evan suggested he take over managing the household utility accounts. He worked in finance, he said. He could probably find better rates, maybe bundle things differently, save me the hassle. I was a little surprised by the offer, but couldn't find a reason to object. I gave him the login information. In May, Laura mentioned she'd noticed my GIC at the credit union was coming due. Had I thought about where I was going to roll it over? There were better products out there. Evan knew someone at a different institution. I told her I was happy with the credit union. I'd been banking there for 20 years. She didn't push it, but the subject came up again the following week, and the week after that. In June, they got a key to the main house for emergencies, Evan said, in case I ever needed them quickly. That seemed reasonable. Looking back, I can see the shape of it. At the time, I just thought my son-in-law was helpful and my daughter was concerned about me. Those things were probably partly true, but there was something else underneath. I just didn't want to see it. My neighbor Gord had noticed before I did. Gord is 71, ex-RCMP, Stu Sharper's attack, and not a man who keeps his opinions to himself. He stopped me one afternoon while I was checking the mail. "How are the house guests?" he asked. Something in his voice made me look at him properly. "Fine," I said. "Why?" He shrugged. "Seen that truck of his parked outside your credit union twice in the last month. Just wondered." I told him Evan did errands for me sometimes, which was true. Gord just nodded and went back inside. But I thought about it that night. I couldn't remember asking Evan to run errands at the credit union. I didn't say anything. That was my mistake. I filed it away and told myself there was probably a reasonable explanation. In September, 8 months after they moved in, Laura sat down with me and said she was worried. I hadn't been myself since Mom died, she said. I was forgetting things. I'd left the stove on twice. She and Evan had been talking, and they thought it might be time to see a doctor, maybe get a cognitive assessment, just to be safe. I was stunned. I hadn't left the stove on. I'm careful about things like that. I told her that. She showed me a photo on her phone. My stove, an element glowing red, no pot on it. She said Evan had found it like that when he came upstairs to drop off some mail. I stared at that photo for a long time. I didn't remember it. I didn't remember leaving the stove on. I thought about the GIC conversation, the utilities, the key, Gord's offhand comment by the mailbox. I felt something cold move through me, but I still said nothing. I was 64 years old, and my daughter was sitting across from me with what looked like genuine worry on her face. What was I supposed to say? I agreed to see my doctor. Dr. Whitmore had been my GP for 15 years. She knew me. She listened to my concerns, did a full cognitive screen, blood work, the works. Called me a week later. "Your results are completely normal," she said. "For what it's worth, you presented with no signs of cognitive impairment whatsoever. Whatever's going on at home, it isn't that." I thanked her and sat with that information for a few days. Then I called Laura. She was quieter than I expected. Said she was relieved, of course, but that the assessment was just one tool and we should still be watchful. Evan got on the phone and said almost exactly the same thing, word for word, like they'd rehearsed it. That was the moment I knew something was badly wrong. I just didn't know what yet. I started paying attention differently. I started noticing things I'd let blur in the background. The utility bills. I had never actually seen a bill since Evan took over. He just told me what to e-transfer each month. I had no idea what the actual amounts were. When I asked him to show me, he said everything was online. He'd set up paperless billing. He'd print something off for me. He never did. My investment account at the credit union. I called my advisor and asked to review recent activity. There had been no changes, but there was a note on my file from 2 months prior. Someone had inquired about the process for adding a joint account holder or a power of attorney. It hadn't been authorized. Just an inquiry. My advisor said she'd turned it away. I asked who had made the inquiry. She paused. Said it had come in by phone. The caller had claimed to be my daughter. I went back to Gord that evening. I told him what I'd found. He listened without interrupting, which is not his natural inclination, so I knew he was taking it seriously. "Have you talked to Laura directly?" he asked. "Not yet." "Get a lawyer first," he said, "before you say a word to either of them." That was good advice. I took it. Her name was Brenda Achterberg, a family law solicitor in Barrie, with a calm, unhurried manner and the way of explaining things without making you feel stupid. I sat in her office on a Wednesday afternoon and told her everything: the move-in, the utilities, the stove photo, the credit union inquiry, my doctor's results. She asked careful questions, took notes. "Do you have a current will and power of attorney?" she asked. I did. Both had been updated after Sandra died. Laura was my sole beneficiary and my named attorney for personal care and property. In the original documents, it was entirely appropriate. Laura was my only child, and I trusted her completely. "You may want to revisit those documents," Brenda said carefully, "particularly the property power of attorney." She walked me through what she'd seen in similar situations. How a gradual pattern of taking over financial management, combined with an attempt to establish a cognitive impairment narrative, was a recognized pattern. How the next step in that pattern often involved getting access to financial accounts or property title. How the stove photo was either genuine concern or deliberate staging. I thought about my daughter at 7 years old, helping me build a birdhouse in this same garage. I thought about her reading at her mother's bedside in those last weeks. I thought about how much I had loved and trusted her. I updated my power of attorney that same week, naming a trust company as my property attorney. I put a note on file with my credit union and my bank. I changed the code on the main house alarm. Then I waited. 2 weeks later, on a Sunday afternoon, I came home from Gord's place and found the door to the main house unlocked. Not broken into. Unlocked. They had a key. I went through the house carefully. Nothing was missing, but my filing cabinet in the spare bedroom, the one that held my financial documents, my will, my investment statements, had been gone through. Papers were slightly out of order in a way that told me someone had been through them recently. I called Brenda. She said to document everything, photograph it, and call her back in the morning. I did. I also, on her advice, bought a small voice-activated recorder and put it in the living room. In Ontario, you can legally record conversations you're a party to. I wanted to be a party to whatever was coming, which is how I heard it. 3 days later, Laura came upstairs for what she said was a quick visit. She sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and a sheaf of papers. She wanted to go over my financial situation with me, she said. She was worried I wasn't managing things properly since Mom died. What she didn't know was that Gord was in my house. He was in the back bedroom with the door almost closed, reading a newspaper. My idea. I wanted a witness. Laura laid out the papers. Some were legitimate documents. My will, my investment summary. One was a form I didn't recognize. She explained that she and Evan thought it would make sense, given my memory concerns, to formalize things a little. This form would give Evan co-signing authority on my primary bank account. I asked her to explain why Evan would need that. She said it was just a precaution. She said it like it was nothing. I asked her about the credit union inquiry, about the phone call that had claimed to be from my daughter. The silence that followed was very long. When she finally spoke, her voice had changed. Not to anger exactly, to something more careful. She said the inquiry had just been exploratory. She said she was trying to understand her options. Her options regarding my accounts. I said her name. I said it quietly. I heard you, she said, not a question. I need you to be honest with me right now. She started crying, not the way her mother used to cry. Sandra cried with her whole body, couldn't help it. Laura cried with her face still and controlled, just the tears coming like she was crying reluctantly. She said she was scared, that Evan had convinced her I was declining, that if something happened, I'd be vulnerable, that they needed to be prepared. Did you take that photo of the stove? I asked. Did you stage it? She didn't answer. That was the answer. I heard Gord come down the hallway. I watched Laura realize we weren't alone. I asked her to leave. I told her I needed time to think and that we would talk again when I was ready. She stood up at the door and looked at me in a way I won't fully describe, because some things between a parent and a child are private even when they're terrible. Then she went back downstairs. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in the workshop space I'd made in the spare room, a long table covered with small electronics projects, half-fixed lamps, a shortwave radio I'd been rebuilding for months, a pegboard with tools I'd had since my 30s. Sandra had bought me that pegboard for Christmas the year we moved into this house. I held the soldering iron I wasn't using and thought about what it means to love your child. Whether love requires you to submit to whatever they want to do to you. Whether love means anything at all if you let it be used as the instrument of your own destruction. I decided it didn't. The next morning, I called Brenda and told her everything, including what the recorder had captured. She told me what my options were clearly and without alarm. I had grounds for a civil action, the staged cognitive decline, the unauthorized account inquiry, the financial documents accessed without permission, the co-signing form. It was a picture. I also gave Evan written notice to vacate the basement apartment. In Ontario, with a close family member in a basement unit, the rules are different than a standard tenancy. Brenda confirmed I had the right to end the arrangement with proper notice. I gave 60 days as she recommended. Evan called me that same afternoon. He was calm in the way that people are calm when they're managing their presentation. He said he thought there had been a misunderstanding. He said he was just trying to help. I told him I appreciated that, and that they had 60 days. He called twice more that week. The second time, less calm. He said I was making a mistake, that I was isolating myself, that I was going to regret this. I said goodbye and ended the call. Laura came to see me 10 days later. Without Evan, she stood on my front step in the November cold, looking younger than 38 and older than I could bear. I let her in. She didn't make excuses this time. She sat in the kitchen and said she was sorry, that Evan had framed everything as protecting me, that she'd wanted to believe it because it was easier than admitting she was letting him do something wrong, that she'd convinced herself it was for my benefit, when it was really about fear, her fear of being responsible for everything when I got older, and her husband's less noble version of that same fear. I listened. I didn't think of you as a problem to manage, she said, but I let him. The difference between those two things matters. I want to be clear about that. She didn't drive this. She followed someone who did, because it was easier. That's its own kind of failure, but it isn't the same thing. I told her I understood the distinction. I told her it didn't make what happened acceptable. I told her we had a long way to go. She nodded and wiped her eyes. She asked about the lawsuit. Brenda had sent a formal letter at this point, and whether there was any path that didn't end in court. I thought about it. If Evan makes full restitution for the utilities, I still don't know how much he took, we're still calculating, and if you both sign a legal acknowledgement of what was attempted, I'll consider alternatives to litigation. She said she'd talk to her lawyer. Evan and Laura moved out the week before Christmas. A Saturday again, like when they arrived. Colder this time. I watched from the living room window. Evan didn't look at the house when he left. Laura looked back once, at the front door, then got in the car. I went downstairs after they were gone. The basement apartment was clean, which I hadn't expected. The small kitchen was spotless. There was a card on the counter. Laura's handwriting. I'm sorry, Dad. I know that's not enough, but it's the truest thing I have right now. I put it in my jacket pocket. By February, Brenda had documented that Evan had been running the household utilities through a separate account he controlled, skimming a modest but consistent amount each month, small enough to go unnoticed, large enough to add up. Over 8 months, just under $4,000, not a vast sum, but deliberate, calculated. He knew exactly what he was doing. He agreed to repay the amount in full, plus Brenda's fees in exchange for my agreement not to pursue the matter criminally. Brenda said I could push further. I chose not to. He wasn't worth the years it would cost me. Laura and I spoke by phone in March. Short at first, then longer. She'd left Evan by then, moved back to Kingston, was staying with a friend, had started seeing a therapist. She told me the therapist was helping her understand how she'd let herself be led into something she knew was wrong because confronting it felt too hard. I told her I appreciated her telling me that. I know that's not the same as forgiving you, I said. I know, she said. I'm not asking for that yet. That was the most honest conversation we'd had in years, maybe ever. Spring came slowly the way it always does in Badi. Grey for weeks, and then suddenly all at once green. I rented the basement apartment to a nursing student named Petra from Georgian College. She pays on time, keeps to herself, occasionally leaves vegetables from a container garden she started on the back patio. I don't mind. Gord came over for a barbecue in June. We ate on the back deck and watched the neighborhood in the long golden light of an Ontario summer evening. He asked how Laura was doing. I said I thought she was doing the work. And you? He asked. Getting there. I went back into my workshop after he left. The shortwave radio was almost finished. I'd been picking at it for nearly a year. A beautiful old Hallicrafters from the 1960s that a man at the antiques and collectibles sale in Innisfile had practically given away because he didn't think it could be fixed. cracked cabinet, corroded contacts, a transformer that had seen better decades. I turned it on for the first time that evening. Static, then signals emerging from the noise, distant voices. Morse, the quiet hum of the short wave bands that haven't changed much since before I was born. Different stations, different lives, the whole world communicating, just underneath the surface if you know how to listen. I thought about what it takes to repair something that's been damaged. How sometimes a single corroded connection is the only thing standing between silence and sound. How you have to be patient. How you have to know what you're looking for. My daughter sent a card in July. She was doing well, she wrote. She was making her own way. She thought about calling, but wasn't sure I was ready. She hoped I was. I wrote back, first time since it happened. I didn't offer forgiveness. I wasn't sure I had it yet. But I told her I'd received the card and that I was glad she was doing okay and that I wasn't writing her off. That there was still a door here, even if I wasn't ready to open it all the way. I mailed on a Tuesday morning, walked to the box at the end of the street and back. Gord waved from his driveway. The air had that particular early fall smell that means school is starting somewhere. That summer is winding down, that things are changing whether you're ready or not. I've been 65 for 2 months now. I have a new power of attorney with a firm that has no interest in my property beyond their professional fee. My finances are clear, organized, and entirely under my own control. My house is mine. What I lost is harder to account for. A year of trust. An easy vision of how the future was supposed to go. A version of my daughter that I built in my mind over 6 decades that turned out to be partly true and partly what I needed to believe. What I kept is what matters. My independence, my home, my clarity about who I am and what I'm worth and what I will not allow to be taken from me. And somewhere in Kingston, I know my daughter is sitting in a therapist's office 3 times a week, doing the work of becoming someone she can live with. Maybe that's enough to start with. The shortwave radio sits on my workbench, restored and running. On clear nights I can pick up signals from farther than I expected. Voices out of the dark, clear and real, proof that what seems broken sometimes just needs someone patient enough to find what's wrong and fix it properly. I turn it on most evenings before bed. I listen, and I wait to see what comes through. There's a moment I keep coming back to. I'm sitting in my garage at 6 in the morning, coffee going cold, holding my phone after Laura hung up. The neighborhood is waking up around me. Dogs, school buses, ordinary life. And I'm standing at the edge of something I didn't want to be true. I think about Evan shaking my hand that first Saturday, the rented cube van in the driveway, the way he said he really appreciated it. I think about how I believed him, not because I was naive, but because believing him was easier than the alternative. That's what I've had to sit with. Not that I was fooled, but that some part of me chose not to look too closely because looking closely would have cost me something I wasn't ready to lose. What Evan did was calculated, small enough to go unnoticed, consistent enough to add up. He understood that the easiest person to deceive is someone who loves you. That's not wisdom. It's a kind of low cunning that tends to catch up with itself eventually. The utilities, the account inquiry, the staged photo of the stove, each one was a small bet that I'd be too trusting, or too tired, or too lonely to push back. He was wrong. But he almost wasn't. Laura's failure was different, and in some ways harder to make peace with. She didn't invent the scheme, but she let it happen because confronting it was uncomfortable and going along was easy. I've thought a lot about that distinction. There's a kind of moral cowardice that doesn't look like cowardice at all. It looks like deference, or loyalty, or just keeping the peace. Laura had all the information she needed to know something was wrong. She chose not to use it. That's on her, and I think she knows it. What God gave me was something I didn't know I needed. A clear-eyed friend who saw what I was refusing to see and said it plainly. You don't survive something like this alone. You survive it because someone stands in your back bedroom holding a newspaper and later says, "Get a lawyer first," before you say a word to either of them. That's not luck. That's what it looks like when you've kept good people close over the years. What I learned about myself is this: I'm harder to knock down than I thought. Not because I'm exceptional, but because at some point I stopped waiting for things to resolve themselves and started making deliberate choices. I changed the alarm code. I updated the power of attorney. I put a recorder in the living room. None of that feels dramatic in the retelling. At the time, it felt like survival. Plain and practical, one step in front of the other. I'm 65 now. I run my own finances. I know what I own and what I owe. I rent the basement to a nursing student who leaves vegetables on the back patio. On clear nights, I sit with the shortwave radio I spent a year rebuilding and listen to signals coming in from farther than I expected. Laura is doing the work. That matters to me, even if I'm not ready to say everything's fine. Some things take longer than we want them to. Rebuilding trust, if it's going to mean anything at all, has to be done at the right pace. You can't rush it any more than you can rush a repair you're doing properly. I won because I paid attention. I paid attention because I finally decided I was worth paying attention to. That's the whole of it.